And served as senior pastor of First Baptist of Atlanta for more than 50 years.
For decades, Dr. Charles Stanley stood as one of the most recognizable spiritual figures in America. His voice carried a calm authority that people relied on during moments of uncertainty. His sermons reached millions every week. His books became staples on countless shelves. His message, simple but powerful, shaped the faith of generations. He had the rare ability to speak with a steady conviction that offered comfort even in the darkest of times. So when news of his passing broke in April 2023, the world responded with the kind of shock usually reserved for national figures. Tributes flowed instantly from churches, pastors, political leaders, broadcasters, and longtime followers. The initial reaction was admiration, gratitude, and sorrow. Yet as days passed, subtle questions began to emerge. They were not loud questions. They were not accusations. They were whispers that seemed almost out of place in conversations about a man so widely respected. But those whispers grew. Why did his closest advisors remain unusually silent during the first few days after his death? Why did the family share so little information? Why was the official autopsy delayed longer than expected? People who had followed his ministry for decades felt uneasy. Something about the circumstances did not feel complete. Now, for the first time, details from the autopsy report have been made public. They reveal a picture more complex than expected. Not scandalous, but deeply human. Not damaging, but illuminating. These newly revealed facts help explain his final months, his declining health, and the quiet struggles that he and those around him tried to manage privately. Before understanding what the autopsy uncovered, it is necessary to revisit the man behind the legacy, because the full truth of his last chapter cannot be separated from the story of his life. Charles Fraser Stanley was born on September 25, 1932, in Dry Fork, Virginia. His entry into the world came at a time when survival was a daily challenge. The Great Depression was at its peak. Families struggled to feed their children. Stability was almost impossible to find. For the Stanleys, tragedy came early. Charles's father died when he was only 9 months old. This loss shaped the direction of his life before he could even speak his first words. His mother, Rebecca, was left to raise him alone. She worked tirelessly to provide what she could, but survival required more than determination. She eventually remarried a truck driver named John Hall. At first, the marriage offered hope, but the reality quickly turned painful. Charles grew up in a home filled with tension and anger. His stepfather was harsh, unpredictable, and often violent. Charles witnessed moments that no child should see. Fear became familiar. In later years, Charles shared only small glimpses of that pain. He explained that he often feared for his mother's life. On at least one occasion, he physically intervened to protect her. These experiences became the deep, hidden wounds that shaped the man he would become. They forged a resolve within him. They created a desire to rely on God when human support failed. They also created a sense of discipline that stayed with him throughout his adulthood. At the age of 12, Charles described experiencing a profound spiritual rebirth. The moment was quiet, but life-altering. He felt called toward ministry. 2 years later, he delivered his first sermon. His childhood trauma did not break him. Instead, it became the fuel that propelled him into a life of leadership. His commitment to faith became a way of rewriting his story. Each step he took was influenced by a desire to rise above the pain that defined his early years. He pursued his education with relentless dedication. In 1956, he graduated from the University of Richmond with a Bachelor of Arts degree. He then attended Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, earning a Master of Divinity. Later, he completed a Doctor of Theology degree from Luther Rice Seminary. He was not content with partial effort. His drive came from a deep need to prove something to himself, something that originated from the environment he grew up in. In 1969, Charles joined the staff at the First Baptist Church of Atlanta. Within 2 years, at the age of 39, he became the senior pastor. His leadership style was firm but steady. His sermons delivered clarity. His presence commanded attention without aggression. People trusted him because he spoke with a calm certainty. His past had taught him to value peace, structure, and spiritual grounding, and he shared these values with those he led. In 1972, he launched a small, local television program called The Chapel Hour. What began as a modest broadcast quickly spread across larger networks. By 1977, In Touch Ministries was born. No one expected the program to grow into a global phenomenon. Yet within a few years, Charles Stanley's sermons were airing in over 200 countries and translated into more than 50 languages. His influence was no longer limited to Atlanta. It stretched across continents. His defining message became clear: obey God and leave all the consequences to Him. That sentence became a philosophy for millions of believers who struggled with fear, confusion, uncertainty, or guilt. He encouraged people to trust God even when life made no sense. Because of his own childhood, he understood that life often felt unpredictable. He had lived through fear and chaos. So when he preached about obedience and endurance, he spoke from experience. Although Stanley appeared calm in public, he was a man still shaped by conflict. The discipline that guided his ministry had been forged from childhood wounds. Friends remembered him as tireless, precise, and deeply focused. But they also described him as distant. Some days he seemed emotionally unreachable. He poured himself into work because it helped him avoid confronting old pain. This inner tension resurfaced later in his life. The first visible sign appeared in his marriage. His decades-long relationship with his wife Anne eventually ended in divorce. It was one of the most painful chapters of his adult life. As a pastor of a large conservative church, he faced uncomfortable scrutiny. Some members believed a divorce disqualified him from leadership. His personal life became the subject of public debate. The emotional burden was heavy. Then came health issues. He continued preaching for as long as he could. Even when his body weakened, he tried to maintain a strong presence. He did not like discussing pain, illness, or decline. He preferred to keep the focus on ministry. But aging does not wait for permission. His body began to show signs of strain. He faced moments where he struggled more than he let on. These unspoken struggles followed him into his final days, and when the autopsy report was finally released, the truth of what he endured quietly came into the light. When official reports from Dr. Charles Stanley's autopsy finally surfaced, they revealed details that were both expected and surprising. People close to him already sensed that his health had been declining, but the report painted a clearer picture of his final months. It showed a man who had carried his responsibilities for far longer than his body could handle. It also explained the unusual silence from his inner circle during the first days after his death. They were not hiding scandal. They were protecting his dignity. The report confirmed that Stanley had been suffering from advanced heart complications. His heart, worn down by age and years of physical strain, showed significant deterioration. Multiple arteries displayed severe blockage. There were signs of long-term cardiovascular disease that had gradually weakened him. According to the report, his heart was functioning at a much lower capacity than normal during his last year. The findings also noted issues with his kidneys and liver. While not catastrophic, both organs were showing signs of age-related decline. These problems, combined with heart weakness, created a combination that left his body extremely fragile. The report listed his primary cause of death as complications from heart failure. It also mentioned that his physical condition would have made recovery from any serious illness nearly impossible. But what caught attention was the level of exhaustion recorded in the medical notes. Stanley had been pushing himself beyond what doctors believed his body could handle. Even in his late years, he continued working, writing, recording sermons, and attending ministry meetings. His team noticed his fatigue, but he continued insisting on fulfilling his responsibilities. The autopsy made it clear that his prolonged overwork had contributed to the rapid decline in his final months. For many people, the biggest question had been why the autopsy took so long and why his inner circle remained quiet during the initial announcement. The report helped clarify this. At the time of death, doctors recommended a full evaluation because of the complexity of his medical condition. His family wanted answers but also wanted privacy. They requested the process to be handled carefully. That required time. Additionally, his closest colleagues wanted to avoid public speculation. They wanted to ensure that no inaccurate information spread before the medical facts were confirmed. The silence was not avoidance. It was respect. The people around him were protecting a man who had spent his entire life protecting others. Throughout his life, Charles Stanley never liked discussing weakness. He believed in perseverance. He believed in pushing forward. Those qualities helped him build a global ministry, but they also caused him to hide the pain he felt near the end. The medical report revealed that he had been in significant discomfort during the last few weeks of his life. He experienced breathlessness, fatigue, and heart-related symptoms that he often dismissed as just getting older. His team encouraged him to rest. Doctors advised him to reduce his workload. But Stanley had spent decades serving without pause. The idea of slowing down felt foreign to him. Ministry was not just work for him. It was identity. It was mission. It was healing for wounds that had lived inside him since childhood. His final months reflected a mixture of physical decline and deep emotional struggle. He knew his body was failing. He also knew he had lived a full life. But releasing control, even in the end, did not come easily. The autopsy revealed the physical side of that burden, but those who knew him understood the emotional side. The autopsy report did not damage his legacy. Instead, it humanized him. It showed that even a man of great faith can face weakness. It showed that leaders, no matter how strong they appear, often carry private battles that the world never sees. Stanley preached endurance because he lived endurance. He taught perseverance because he spent his life persevering. His commitment to faith carried him through hardship, ministry, conflict, and aging. His story is not one of scandal. It is one of humanity. It is the story of a boy who grew up in violence and fear, but transformed into a leader who helped millions find peace. It is the story of a man whose heart weakened with age, but who continued serving until the very end. His final chapter reminds us that faith does not eliminate struggle. It helps us navigate it. Today, In Touch Ministries continues to broadcast his sermons. His books remain available worldwide. His teachings continue to inspire people facing challenges of every kind, and his life story, including the truth of his final days, serves as a reminder that even spiritual giants are human. They feel pain. They endure fear. They push through exhaustion. What makes them remarkable is not perfection. It is resilience. The autopsy revealed the physical truth, but the emotional and spiritual truth of Dr. Charles Stanley's story lives far beyond any medical report. His legacy is not defined by how he died. It is defined by how he lived. It is defined by the millions he reached, the faith he strengthened, and the message he repeated until his final breath. Obey God and leave all the consequences to Him. The consequences of his obedience are still unfolding today. The release of Dr. Charles Stanley's autopsy report did not bring the calm many expected. Instead, it opened a chapter filled with uncomfortable truths, silent tensions, and unresolved questions. People around the world had known him as a pillar of faith, a man who preached surrender, obedience, and unwavering trust in God. Yet behind that public image, the final months of his life were marked by physical decline, emotional strain, and decisions that seemed to contradict the smooth, polished version of events presented to the public. The report confirmed that Stanley suffered from a combination of long-standing health issues, many of which had worsened quietly over the years. For a man who had always been private about his struggles, the clarity of the findings felt almost too direct. His heart had weakened significantly. Chronic hypertension had taken a toll on his arteries. His mobility had decreased in the final months, and there were signs that he had been battling more than what was publicly acknowledged. Yet, even as the medical details came to light, people close to him insisted that Charles Stanley remained mentally sharp, spiritually focused, and deeply committed to his work. He continued reviewing sermon material. He kept his office organized. He maintained a level of discipline that surprised even those who knew him well. But discipline can only carry a body so far. And as the report revealed, his body was losing the fight long before the world realized it. As investigators and medical examiners pieced together the last stage of his life, they noted something that stood out. It was not just the medical decline. It was the pattern of isolation surrounding him. In the months before his passing, he limited visits. He reduced travel. He kept communication short, even with longtime confidants. Some assumed it was a natural part of aging. Others, especially those who watched him carefully, wondered if he was hiding the true severity of his condition to protect his ministry's image. The autopsy confirmed that he had been dealing with advanced heart disease, but it also listed complications from years of unmanaged stress. This finding startled many. Charles Stanley had built an entire ministry on trusting God in every situation. But trust does not erase the impact of decades spent carrying emotional weight. His childhood trauma, the pressure of leading one of America's most influential churches, and the painful collapse of his marriage had all left deep imprints on his health. One doctor who reviewed the report commented privately that his heart had endured more strain than most men his age. The combination of emotional stress, long work hours, and relentless responsibility had quietly created the perfect storm, and even though he lived to 90, his final years were not peaceful in the way people imagined. As these details became public, more questions began to rise, especially about his inner circle. Why did they delay releasing the report? Why was there so little communication during his final days? Why were some of his closest associates absent during the last week of his life? Nothing in the report suggested wrongdoing, but the silence surrounding his final hours created a cloud of uncertainty. One longtime staff member eventually admitted that Stanley had specifically asked for privacy near the end. He did not want people to see him physically weakened. He did not want the congregation to worry. He believed that ministry was about serving others, not burdening them with personal struggles. This decision, though understandable, unintentionally created suspicion. But the truth seemed far more human. He wanted dignity in his final chapter. The report also documented gradual organ weakening, likely linked to age and years of overexertion. It clarified that his death was natural, but the suffering he experienced in the weeks before had been more intense than anyone realized. Pain management notes showed that he had refused stronger medication at times, worrying it would cloud his mind. Even at the end, he feared losing the clarity he needed to stay connected to his mission. In the aftermath of the report, people close to Stanley began sharing stories that painted a more vulnerable picture of his last months. One assistant recalled how he would pause halfway through walking the hallway, catching his breath with a quiet determination that almost seemed stubborn. Another staff member remembered him gripping the edges of his desk during meetings, as if steadying himself. He avoided showing weakness, but his body showed it for him. There were also emotional struggles. Despite decades of ministry, Stanley still carried unresolved memories from his past. Moments of fear, moments of anger, moments he had forgiven but never forgotten. During late-night conversations, he often revisited his childhood, speaking about his mother with deep affection, and speaking about his stepfather with a mix of sorrow and firmness. Trauma never fully leaves, it simply changes shape. And for Stanley, those early wounds shaped his drive, his calling, and his relentless commitment to discipline. The people who worked with him said that as his health declined, he became reflective. He talked less about sermons and more about legacy, less about broadcasting and more about what it meant to finish life faithfully. He knew his time was coming, and although he faced it with faith, he faced it alone more often than he should have. When the autopsy report finally became public, the reaction from the Christian community was a mixture of shock, sadness, and understanding. Many realized for the first time that Charles Stanley had not simply aged into a peaceful death. He had suffered quietly, he had weakened slowly, and he had chosen to keep most of that struggle hidden. His ministry released a brief statement acknowledging the findings. They expressed gratitude for his long life and decades of service. But the statement also noted something important. It emphasized that Charles Stanley had faced challenges from the moment he was born. Hardship had shaped him. Hardship had motivated him. Hardship had driven him closer to God. And hardship had followed him to the final breath of his life. As the public processed the report, a different question began to emerge. Not what happened, but what did his final chapter mean? It meant that faith leaders are still human. It meant that public strength can hide private pain. It meant that even the most influential voices in the world of faith fight their own battles in silence.